Bluegrass music, as I know it, was rooted from the early country music sound. Songs written and sang by such people as Jimmy Rogers, the Carter Family, the Blue Sky Boys, just to name a few. Some of these songs were later to become the traditional form of what is now known as bluegrass music. The wild, beautiful, poverty-stricken mountain country produced some of the best music ever heard. Families would get together late in the evenings when the work was all done and let their music and voices ring out across the hills. But in the mid-1930s, a young man from Rosine, Kentucky came along, and with his brothers Charlie and Birch, started playing their kind of music, or their sound as they called it. The young man's name was William Bill Monroe. And I guess the Monroe brothers deserve credit for actually starting what we know as bluegrass music. The high, lonesome sound of Bill's voice soon became a foundation for bluegrass. And it wasn't long till he left his brothers to form his own band. And a great many of today's big names in bluegrass were at one time or another members of Bill Monroe's famous Bluegrass Boys. Many of them have went on to become legends in their own right. In 1939, Bill Monroe joined the world-famous Grand Ole Opry. Today, more than 40 years later, he's still a featured performer on that same show. Bill not only sang the heartfelt songs that were handed down to him, but he also wrote many of the songs and instrumental tunes that were later to become standards. He wrote songs about his life in the hills of Kentucky, songs about home, and songs about love. Most of all, he wrote about people. One of these people was his uncle. He played a fiddle, and his name was Penn. Where the people would come from far away, dance all night till the break of day. When the caller would holler, do-see-do, they knew Uncle Penn was ready to go. Late in the evening, about sundown, high on the hill and above the town, Uncle Penn played the fiddle, Lord, how it would ring. You could hear it talk, you could hear it sing. One of the secrets of bluegrass music is its close harmony. I guess that's why there's so many family bands evident today. Out of the beautiful Clinch Mountains around McClure, Virginia, came the Stanley Brothers. The sad lead voice of Carter blended perfectly with the high, lonesome tenor of Ralph. And I guarantee it would put chills on you when they'd sing a song. They had a special way of doing a song that was to capture the hearts of millions of fans across the United States. You could go to the smallest isolated town in the country, and chances are if that town had a jukebox, it's a good bet you'd find a Stanley Brothers song on it. They little knew back then that they too would one day become legends. In the deep rolling fields of old Virginia, there's a place I love so well, where I spent many days of my childhood, in a cabin where we used to dwell. White dove will mourn in sorrow, the willows will hang their head. I live my life in sorrow since Mother and Daddy are dead. The first banjo player that Bill Monroe had was a tall, skinny, long-legged boy from Anvil, Kentucky, named David Aikman. He too was to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry, and then years later he became a featured performer on the popular TV show Hee Haw. We knew him as Strang Bean, and he was one of the best of what we call clawhammer-style banjo pickers. But in the early 1940s, a young banjo player from Shelby, North Carolina came on the scene. And brother, he had a new way of picking that old five that would tear the house down when it came time for him to take a break. His three-finger style of picking was to create such an impact on the music industry that people from all over the world would soon sit up and take notice. The man was a genius. He was the blueprint of today's banjo pickers. His name was Earl Eugene Scruggs. In 1948, a partnership was formed between Earl Scruggs and Lester Raymond Flatt, another former bluegrass boy from Sparta, Tennessee. This team was to become one of the most successful of all time. Their work was to be used in movies, books, theaters, and stage shows all across the world. They were known as Lester Flatt, Earl Scruggs, and the Foggy Mountain Boys. Most people just shortened it down to Flatt and Scruggs. And if you wanted to get real personal about it, just ask any bluegrass nut who Lester and Earl was. They'd tell you right now. I was out in the wildwood sitting a log, picking on a hog. Honey, let me be your solid dog. Let me be your solid dog, I won't be your man at all. Let me be your solid dog. Let me be your solid dog, I won't be your man at all. Let me be your solid dog.
In the 1950s, Flatt and Scruggs became members of the Grand Ole Opry. Their sponsor was a little-known flower company out of Nashville, Tennessee. And before long, things really began to happen.
Now you bake right. Martha White.
Yes, ma'am.
Goodness gracious, good and light, Martha White. For the finest cornbread you can bake. Get Martha White's fries meal, the one all-purpose meal. Martha White's fries meal, for goodness sake.
Yes, sir, Lester Flatt, Earl Scruggs, and Martha White. Three names soon heard all over America and spoken in the same breath. Some of the best bluegrass ever produced came out of the 1950s, but the radio stations would hardly play it. Television became a new medium of exposure for bluegrass, and although the music behind it wasn't really hardcore grass, the Beverly Hillbillies brought our kind of pickin' to many of the public who would normally have never heard it. In 1949, a young man from Virginia came to work for Bill Monroe as a bluegrass boy. His smooth lead voice was a natural for bluegrass, and he soon left Bill to go on his own. He too became a legend. His name was Malcolm Wiseman, better known as Mac.
On a day like today, we'd pass the time away, writing love letters in the sand. How my poor heart would break with every wave it broke over love letters in the sand. You made a vow to me you'd always be true, but somehow that vow meant nothing to you. You laughed when I cried each time we saw the tide take our love letters from the sand.
Out of Sneedville, Tennessee, came a young man with not only a flair for talking, but also a hard-driving way of picking and singing that was to become his trademark. They said that he would rehearse for hours on a certain part to get it just right, and it always paid off for him. Yes, even back in the early 50s, Jimmy Martin and the Sunny Mountain Boys were one of the hottest bluegrass acts around.
I've been to the doctor, he says I'm all right. He must have been lying, I'm losing my sight. He should have examined the eyes of my mind.
20/20 vision and walking around blind. 20/20 vision and walking around blind.
Two brothers who worked with Jimmy Martin in the early days were the Osbornes, and the creative ability of Sonny on the banjo, along with the high, crystal-clear lead voice of Bobby, tore the bluegrass world apart with their recording of Ruby. But it was the close, on-the-money harmony that was to become their trademark. Their recording of this old Carter family tune was a masterpiece.
Come all ye fair and tender ladies, take warning how you court young men. They're like the star on a summer morning. They first appear and then they're gone. Oh, love is handsome, love is charming, and love is pretty while it's new. But love grows cold as love grows old and fades away like morning dew. Fades away like morning dew.
Although Earl Scruggs was considered to be the first, that doesn't mean he was the only banjo picker around in the early days. A young man from Spartanburg, South Carolina, was creating quite a stir around the country, not only as a very talented and capable musician, but also as a great writer and creator of music. Don Reno's work was also to be used later in movies. His partner was Red Smiley from Bryson City, North Carolina. He was known as the Thin Man with a Big Voice, and they too had one of the best shows going.
My heart spoke to me. It said to love you through eternity, not knowing that you were another's bride. I vowed I'd always be close by your side. You know I love you and I always will. I know you're married, but I love you still.
The state of Virginia produced some of the finest bluegrass musicians to be found. In the Clinch Mountains, less than 20 miles away from the old Stanley home place near McClure, a little town called Colburn, another brother act was making itself quite a name. They looked and dressed the very same way they played music. Perfect. They were the Virginia boys, Jim and Jesse Mcreynolds. And when they appeared on stage, it was just as smooth running as a sewing machine. The day that I kissed you and told you goodbye, your lips told me that you would wait. But your lips deceived me and told me a lie while you were stealing my faith. Are you all alone with the memory? Now that I am gone, darling, are you missing me? Darling, are you missing me? From the mountaineer state of West Virginia came a long, tall, lanky fiddle player named Stoney Cooper. And he brought with him his beautiful young wife, and together they made music their destiny. Gospel music is a big part of bluegrass music, and this is one song that I remember best from the little lady with the big voice. I remember the chills going up my back and my hair standing straight on end when little Wilma Lee walked up to that mic and boomed it out. One morning past daybreak,
As the crowd slowly gathered, like a sheep he was humble,
like a sheep he was humble,
to his father's own will.
to his father's own will.
So sad was his face,
So sad was his face that
the birds stopped their singing.
the birds stopped their singing.
They were walking, my Lord,
They were walking, my Lord,
up Calvary's hill.
up Calvary's hill. They were walking, my Lord, up Calvary's hill. Calvary's hill. And so we have named just a few of the pioneers of our bluegrass music. There were many others who traveled the roads and beat the bushes. The list could go on and on and on. You may remember the cars going through your town with the speaker on top and the voice pleading for you to come out that night and see the show. They laid the groundwork in the days before interstate highways and the days before air-conditioned buses. More often than not, they never even made expenses when they played. Some of them have gone on to meet their maker, leaving behind only their music and their memory. But we'll never forget any of them. We're proud to be just a small part of this great world of bluegrass music. We can never deny it, and we can never be ashamed of it. And I long to see the day when my son will stand up tall, look the world right in the eye, and say, that's my bluegrass heritage, and I'm proud of it.